right. Speaking of successful and taking over the dialogue, we got to talk about Nick Fuentes, who you just had on your podcast, Tucker. You platformed him. I'm being facetious here. You platformed him.
I created him.
Basically. It was an interesting discussion. For those of you who don't know Nick Fuentes and have been living under a rock, he's a 27-year-old white nationalist with a very popular show on Rumble, about 500,000 subscribers, which isn't actually that big when you think about it. His followers call themselves Groypers, and he's gained hundreds of thousands over the past 6 months. He's on quite a heater, and he's got a bunch of controversial opinions. I'll just give you the quotes. This has nothing to do with my opinion on him. He was asked by Piers Morgan if he described himself as a racist, and he said, totally. I think everybody, if we're being honest, is racist. The only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment on women. Piers asked Nick if he was gay. Nick said, no, but I will say women are very difficult to be around. Piers then asked, and do you think they should have the right to vote? Nick said, I do not, absolutely not. On Israel, Fuentes is very critical and what he calls organized Jewry in America. So now you interviewed him. Couple of different ways to take this, but you did a good job of telling his origin story. He was part of PragerU. He's got this really activated base. Why is he resonating at this moment in time? And maybe you could explain to the audience MAGA versus America First, America Only, which I think you're part of America First, but you tell us, because I think these are just terms right now. They're not like political parties or anything.
Well, there's a struggle over what those terms mean. It's very ugly and probably necessary because you need to define terms. Like that's the first thing you do, I would say, when you think through what you should be doing with your life, for example. So as for Fuentes, his origin story is a little more precise, and I'll keep it short. But he tweeted something as a freshman at BU, pretty mildly critical of the Congress for doing the bidding of this foreign country, Israel. And somehow Ben Shapiro saw that and attacked him and tried to get him kicked out of his Republican club and made sure he didn't get an internship with some conservative organization. And I'm not attacking Ben Shapiro, but that kind of tells you what attempts to shut people down, to shut conversations down, result in. They don't go away. They just fester in the darkness, and they can sometimes become really ugly. So what Fuentes is, among other, well, first of all, Fuentes is saying a lot of true things. That's why he's popular. He's funny. He's smart. But
he's a good broadcaster. Yeah.
He's a great broadcaster. But Fuentes, on some macro level, is troubling because his platform is an expression of something that has kind of taken over all political discourse, which is identity politics, tribalism. And I'm just opposed to that, period, and always will be. And I just think that we're governed by universal principles or we're governed by the mafia. Those are our choices. And so, our principles have to apply to every human being, or certainly every American citizen, period, or they're not principles. They're just a justification for tyranny. So Fuentes, has a different kind of identity politics, but there are all kinds of different identity politics. We lived under it during the Biden years. We've lived under it most of my life, actually, in one form or another. And so, if anything, Fuentes reminds us that we have to come up with some kind of principle that every American can ascribe to, something called national identity. That is not a dirty phrase. That's actually necessary to keep the country from disintegrating, which it is. So, what does every American, all 350 million, have in common with every other? And that's the conversation we need to have. And in its absence, then we get a lot of people popping up and being like, well, all white people are over here and all black people or Jewish people or whatever. That's not going to work. That will end in violence. Everyone knows that. And so now is probably a pretty good time to figure out what we all have in common. I didn't platform him. First of all, platform is not a verb. And anyone who says it is a verb is probably opposed to my core interests, I would say, and bad at language. Yeah, I interviewed him like interview everybody, and my general belief is you should let people say what they think, and others can decide whether they mean it or not, whether they're being false or sincere, and what they think of what the person is saying. But that's my job. I'm not ashamed of it, despite a lot of efforts to make me ashamed of it. I do disagree with Fuentes on the question of universal principles. I think it's immoral. Well, first of all, it's against my religion to hate any group, and I told him that. But I didn't do a lot of other posturing designed to make me seem like, the good person. Piers unfortunately fell into that trap as an older man. Well, isn't it you are bad? And it's like, okay, I don't even disagree with some of that, but you don't elevate yourself. You look like an out-of-touch buffoon. And that's exactly the trap that was awaiting Piers Morgan. And if you watch that interview and if you watch the reaction to it, that did not diminish Nick Fuentes in any way. It enhanced Nick Fuentes. What diminishes Nick Fuentes is asking him straightforward questions, particularly about women. Not, have you had sex with anybody? But like, why are you so mad at women? And that, letting people talk a lot reveals who they are. That's just true. Sorry.
If you were to give the top 2 or 3 reasons why he's resonating with, it seems like, young men and this burgeoning American First movement, which I guess would be good for you to define right now as best you can, recognizing you're not the leader of it, but you have said, I think, this concept is, resonates with you. So maybe why is Fuentes resonating, and what is America First versus MAGA? Like, explain that
just
to the audience.
in reverse order. I mean, I would argue that the premise of MAGA is America First, but I wouldn't say that America First is a movement. I would say it's the only legitimate reason to run a government. And it's very simple. The government of your democratic republic ought to act in broad terms on behalf of its own citizens. I mean, it's not more complicated than that. There's nothing sinister about it. In fact, anything other than that is sinister because it's illegitimate. For what other reason would you run a democratic republic?
And treasonous.
There isn't one, actually. So, of course, this has to be in America. You could think of a new name for it if that name makes you uncomfortable. But the idea has to be the reason we have a government, or else we have to get rid of the government because there's no other justification for having a government. Okay, so A. B, why is he popular? Because he says that. But I would say more broadly because he's defiant. There's a kind of up yours, buddy. I can't say that, okay, watch this, I will. He's hilarious. He seems steadfast and strong. I don't think he is. He's not even married. So, like, if you're afraid of girls, I think you're a wuss. That's my personal view. But but in his defiance, people see something really appealing. Why wouldn't they? These are kids who've grown up in a world of hectoring and telling them they're bad because of how they were born. And Nick Fuentes is just raising the middle finger to the people saying that and saying up yours. And who wouldn't love that? Of course, people love that.
Second piece of the America First is America Only. And I guess that means...
I don't know what that means. That's it. No, of course, look, we work in concert with others by definition. It's a globalized economy. Maybe it shouldn't be, but it is. But America Only... that argument, to the extent it's not really an argument, it's like a counter slogan designed to undercut the main argument, doesn't really mean it. No one is arguing that. It's just saying, look, the U.S. government ought to act on behalf of its own citizens, to which people who don't believe that, who are embarrassed to explain why they don't believe it, because there's no justification for not believing that, are like, well, you're America Only. No. The government should do that. Every part of the government should have that foremost in mind. How does this help the people who pay for this, in whose name it's done? Like, again, even calling it a movement drives me bonkers because compared to what? Some sort of creepy secretive oligarchy, which we've had most of my life? Like, that's just bad. There's no way to defend that. And we can argue within the framework of America First how to put America first. That's a totally legitimate argument. And there are all kinds of different thoughts about that. But what the motive should be, the goal should be, there's no debate. It has to be for American citizens primarily. If they're, ancillary beneficiaries, that's great. Not against that at all. Let's help everyone if we can. But the point is to help the people who own the country, the shareholders of the United States, who are American citizens. There's no other point, is there?
Chamath, let me bring you in on this from the angle of the America First movement, America Only movement, as a reaction to the first year of the Trump administration, feeling too many people in the Republican Party as benefiting maybe tech oligarchs, billionaires, international issues more than the working man. You have started to tweet a little bit and become vocal about, hey, maybe year 2 of the Trump administration, we got to get refocused on some of these things. Unpack that for us in the audience.
Well, can I offer my feedback on Fuentes first?
Oh, of course, yes. Go with Fuentes if you like.
There's a couple points I want to make. The first is that he is, as Tucker said, charismatic. I think he's funny. And I think that he can animate around a lot of touchy subjects and say things that have shock value. And I think in that, what he is actually like a modern shock jock. He's like a younger Howard Stern. He's the Howard Stern of this era. The way that Howard Stern was in that era unlistenable to so many people because he would be kind of okay for 80% of the time and then go totally off the rails. And you think, man, this guy is some combination of mean, nuts, crazy. And then you throw out all these other adjectives. So that's point number one. Point number two is it is true that the longer you allow him to speak, actually, the more you understand what he thinks. And as a result, the quality of the product will dictate the scale of adoption. And now this is where I think the media, yet again, has been very sloppy and doesn't do their work, which is, and Nick, you can throw this up, there's been a lot of research on what has been happening in the last few months. And the bottom line takeaway in the last few months is that there is a coordinated effort of individual, largely unverified accounts in social media. They typically emanate from India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nigeria. And there is a coordinated amplification process that is happening around this content. And in this chart that you're seeing, it's just a comparison of Nick in the first 30 minutes to what people like Elon get in the first 30 minutes of him posting. Now, why that's so important is you start to see this huge disparity where even though you have the most viral person and account in the world, i.e. at Elon Musk on X, what you see is him completely crushing and dominating the virality in the beginning of his content creation versus anybody else's. And then there's a bunch of other charts. Nick, you can retweet a link to this. It starts to show a pattern where there is a coordinated effort to amplify. I think that's why we're having the Nick Fuentes moment at this point in time. The New York Times all of a sudden sees this information, probably doesn't bother to do the diligence, has a bunch of positive mentions, starts to pump him up as a leader of some kind of nefarious, crazy, scary rebellion.
Well, no, they want to mainstream him.
And they want to try to mainstream him. So what you see is the New York Times trying to mainstream this guy and make him credible so as to paint the right as a bunch of evil, racist ideologues. I think the producers at Piers Morgan didn't understand this was happening. And so when you put him on a 20-minute soundbite shot, it feeds into exactly what makes him popular, the ability to land these small soundbites. This is why I think Tucker's was much better because, again, in multi-hour programming, you can't hide. You see the full facet of what the person is, and you start to understand that this is a very savvy young media personality. Now, when you strip away all of this amplification, the product has to work for it to scale and grow. There's no way that you're going to manifest average normal men and women spending their time to take these views credibly unless it's good and right. There will be a moment in time where curiosity will cause you to say, why is everybody talking about this? We are firmly in that moment. But I think that there is a large portion of what he says, which I don't know whether he believes or not because I haven't spent that much time, but is meant to shock. It's meant to catalyze and animate people. But I don't think it's sustainable because the views themselves are repugnant. So I think
this is why the New York Times wants to elevate him. Can you put it up there? So there I am. I look
amazing.
He looks like a handsome guy in that picture.
I look like a slack-jawed yokel, and he looks like
James
Rebel
Dean.
with a cause.
Yeah.
It's Jed Clampett versus James Dean.
The other thing I'll say is that Sachs and I are in a couple of these group chats with some folks, and some of the chatter there is that who is paying for and who is activating all of these bots and fake accounts in all of these developing world countries? And why did they pick him? Some of that conspiracy basically points to a handful of nations who would love to foment that kind of dissent and that kind of
we don't
chaos
have to
and
wonder about
uprising.
this. I mean, this has been clear for a long time.
So I think it's very important from here on out that if people are to listen to him, I think the longer form content exposes what he really thinks so that you can judge it for yourself. But I would not discount the fact that this moment is happening is not entirely organic. There is a deep, inorganic effort to put this on the front page of the news. And so it's up to traditional media to decide whether they're going to basically lift this guy up as some kind of newfound hero or call it out for what it is, which is lead in the articles with this data, which is widely available and easy to get.
Well, he literally explained this when he was on Tucker's podcast. He was originally in college part of this PragerU kind of movement. And he said he was in a Facebook group, which was the Prager Army. And I've talked about this before. We've joked about it. But there are groups like the one you mentioned, that you're in this group. I heard about it. It's a couple of hundred right-wing folks of note.
Take it easy, Jason.
My invite didn't got lost apparently to it. But yeah, add me to that group, please. But what happens in these groups, some of them are designed to make money. Some of them are designed to make impact. Andrew Tate had one where there was an affiliate scheme put up for it when Twitter started sharing revenue with accounts. And you start looking at these like accounts that are anonymous but get to massive scale, King Koa the Great,
clip farming. You're talking about the clip farming.
Yeah, and they're regurgitating stuff. They're doing it for the money. Obviously, they're making 10, 20 grand a month. It becomes a full-time job to do that. But we've got the Russians, we've got the Chinese, everybody in between doing this kind of pumping. And then there is the actual army. So Nick Fuentes, has an army of young people who do this. And they're on VPNs. And they flood comments. And what they do is they share a clip. And you can experience this in your own social media if you're of note, because you'll have 10 posts get X number of replies. And then all of a sudden the 11th gets 10 times that, all at the same time, directly to it, not from your followers. And that's when they get shared on these group chats.
By the way, we should mention, just tangentially, because I want to get Tucker's take on this, but Australia just passed a law that under 16, you're now not allowed to use social media. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all banned until you turn 16. And in part, Jason, I think it's because these coordinated mis and disinformation or amplification campaigns are on all kinds of characters, not just Nick. They're proliferating because, to your point, the economics creates an incentive, if nothing else. Then there's obviously the state level sponsored chaos that it tries to sow.
Yes.
And one of the only high level bits that you can flip is to say, under a certain age, we're just going to minimize how much of this content you get exposed to because we don't know what it is. Before we go there, can I just say the one thing on America first, America only, whatever these terms are? I don't know what they are.
America first, America only.
Okay, I don't know what they are. These are its slogans, anti-slogans. Here's what I will say. I think it's very important, and I speak as an immigrant. I want to be American. I don't consider myself Canadian American. I don't consider myself Sri Lankan Canadian American. I consider myself American. I want to absorb and I want to reflect the values of this country. I want to know and be able to talk to you about the Constitution of this country. I want to be able to celebrate the cultural heritage of this country. That's part of the compact that I think I'm making. And I do think that's an important thing that we have all lost, where we have to run around in all of our traditional garb. And it just loses that what makes countries great is a shared set of principles and values. And we have to find a way of doing that. When I immigrated from Canada, what I will tell you is Canada took the opposite view. We used to call America a melting pot, pejoratively, even in textbooks. And the textbooks would call Canada a tossed salad. And we would celebrate that that form of multiculturalism was better. But when you fast forward the clock 20 years, all it did was create confusion. For example, if you go to school in Canada, there's like a bajillion holidays. Every culture gets their day off. And then all of a sudden what happens? The kids don't get educated because you have to have every long-tail country get recognized in some way, shape, or form. All of a sudden you lose this very standard form of basic organization. That's just but one example. You know, the forms are in 50 languages. All that does is create chaos. It should have been in English and French because those are the two official languages of the country. All of that indirection, trying to celebrate everybody's heritage, confuses and slows that country down. And you can see it in the GDP. You can see it in the FDI, foreign direct investment. You can see it. So the one thing that we have to agree is that there is an American culture and set of values, and we should not lose it. And we should ask the people that want to be here to embrace it. We all embraced it. Sachs embraced it. If you talk to Sachs's parents, they've embraced it. If you talk to Freeburg's parents, we all came from different countries, but we are fundamentally American.
J. Cal, I wasn't sure, but were you intimating that the party behind Nick Fuentes' meteoric success is the Russians?
No, I was just saying that there's brigading going on.
Which foreign actor do you think it is?
Some of them just want to create chaos. I put Russia in that. Just creating division in America distracts Americans. I think they like that. But there are three levels of this. There's his army. Fuentes does have an army of superfans who are disaffected young men. And there's a reason why they're disaffected. It's hard to get jobs. It's impossible to get a home. Healthcare, they've seen people, go bankrupt because of healthcare. If you look at healthcare, homes, and education, those are the three most important things we have to fix in America. That's why young people are disaffected. And when you're disaffected as a youth and somebody starts blaming the Jews, the blacks, the Hispanics, the border, this issue, that issue, it's really appealing because then you don't have to take any personal responsibility for it. And it is, in fact, really hard to own a home in most cities in America, unless you move to Texas or, Nashville, Florida. And then there's too many homes and prices are going down. And he's a kid and he says stupid stuff, but he says he does tap into that disaffectedness. Where would you put it if you ranked it, Tucker, since you are pretty plugged into this? Is Fuentes' popularity based on the Groypers and this really inside group of people who are amplifying him? Is it what he's saying, or is it like some foreign actors promoting him? How would you handicap his massive popularity? And then we'll move on.
All three play a role, I would say. And if you want to know who is primarily responsible for amplifying him, consider who benefits. If you wanted to discredit America First, a foreign policy, then you would put it in the mouth of someone who is pro-Hitler, of course. Anytime I hear someone endorsing Hitler, I love Hitler, then I'm like, the Fed alarm goes off or the inorganic alarm goes off, right? Okay,
exactly.
So A. B, he is the product of a system that the rest of us tolerated and certain among us created, and we shouldn't be surprised. If you have identity politics, at some point you're going to get white identity politics. I think I wrote a book about this almost 10 years ago, which was totally ignored. But that's inevitable. It's inevitable. And so to fix it, it's not a matter of censoring Nick Fuentes or anyone who likes Nick Fuentes. It's a matter of deracializing our society and making it a fair society where rewards or condemnation are not given on the basis of your DNA. Like, you can't have that and hope to avoid a Rwanda because it's just going to happen. It's inevitable. Tribalism is the threat to every society. And I don't know how we lost sight of that, but
is
we
he
did.
A Fed? People are sort of saying he's a Fed. He's accusing you of being a Fed.
I don't know. The whole Fed unfortunately, so it's such a long story. I won't even bore you with it, but he attacked my father at one point, so I got baited into it, and I called him a Fed. I don't know. But I do know that there are, and I think that Fuentes is let me just be clear. I think he's primarily successful because of his talents and because of the obvious truth behind some of what he is saying. I mean, it's just true, right? The government of this country or any country should act on behalf of its own citizens, and ours doesn't, and that's an outrage. So, okay, that's just true. But the white identity politics part of it, once again, is inevitable. Identity politics will give birth to white identity politics. Why wouldn't it? And your efforts to stamp it out will never work because they're too hypocritical. So the only way to fix that, if you don't like it, is to eliminate all identity politics, which we should do tonight, because it's the road to disaster. That's it.